Morning, Joe, with us now from the Capitol. We've got Republican Senator from South Dakota, member of the Finance Committee. He is Senator John Thune. Sam Stein, Jeremy Peters also back at the table, along with NBC's Casey Hunt. John, it's good talking to you. Just talking to Jeremy Peters about, our old high school, that we had Saxby on, and Saxby been around a long time. And Jeremy basically said, it's kind of weird that you guys that were there in 94 and you in 96, I think, actually seem like some of the moderate old souls in the Republican Party now. It makes us all feel very old and sad.
Yeah, what happened, Joe?
I don't know. I know this. I know that you're just as conservative as you were in 1994, and I know I'm just as conservative as I was in 1994 when they called us right-wing nuts. So, I mean, that's a good question. So, hey, let's talk about the budget for a second. Okay. I don't like it. I understand a lot of Republicans supported it because, well, we didn't want another government shutdown because it would have been devastating to our brand. But I'm particularly concerned with military retirees taking it on the chin the way they are. Is there any fix as you guys go through the conference committee to find places to save money other than from our military retirees? Yeah, it needs to be fixed, Joe. That should have been caught before it got to the floor, but I think there's consensus on both sides that that was a really bad provision to have in the bill, and I think when Congress gets back, there'll be an attempt to make that right by our military retirees. There's no way that that should have been done, especially in such a discriminatory way. But there are other issues, as you mentioned, with the budget. Most of us here, most Republicans, at least in the Senate, were really concerned about breaking the caps, the limits that we put in place on spending 2 years ago in the Budget Control Act, on a promise that somehow we're going to recoup those savings 9 or 10 years from now. And you know from having been here, and I know from having been here, there's very little in year 9 or 9-10 that actually is going to be seen in terms of saving. I think this was a, it was, I guess, probably what ended up having to be done, but not something certainly that most Senate Republicans were in favor of.
Yeah. Senator Sam Stein here. It looks like Congress is going to leave town without having extended unemployment insurance on December 28th, without taking action on an extension, whether it's 3 months or a year long. What is the message that you have for the 1.3 million people who are on this program and will get a cut in the next year because it's not extended?
Well, people would continue to be able to keep the old law, Jeremy. Yeah. Right, exactly. So, but I suspect there's going to be a fairly spirited debate about that next year. I mean, our solution is going to be, let's put policies in place to grow the economy and create jobs and get people back to work, and we're going to be talking aggressively about that. I suspect the Democrats are probably going to want to have a discussion about an extension, and we're happy to enter into that extension or that discussion and talk about some of the other things that we want to do that we think will really solve the problem, and that's getting Americans back to work. And ultimately, that's the best solution to the high unemployment issue.
Hey, Casey,
Senator, it's Casey Hunt. Nice to see you.
Hey, Casey.
This budget passed the idea by its proponents that it would end sort of government by crisis, if you will. But we're already going to be facing the debt ceiling again when you all return in January. And Senator McConnell suggested this week that there's no way that that will be a clean lift. What do you think Republicans should be demanding in exchange for raising the debt ceiling? I think that it would be really great to get some progress on long-term entitlement reform. This short-term budget deal scratched the surface, but that was about it. And, most of us around here would like to see tax reform, entitlement reform, things that we think would actually start bending the curve in favor of economic growth. I think right now what we're really struggling from is we've got this sluggish economy, chronic high unemployment, massive amounts of debt, all of which need to be fixed in the form of reforming our spending, entitlement reform, tax reform, energy policy. I suspect there'll be an effort to do something perhaps along the lines of attaching the approval of the Keystone Pipeline to the debt limit, but I don't know. Those are some things I'm just throwing out there. We'll get into that discussion again next year. The actual date is sort of vague and uncertain. We talk about February 7th, but with the extraordinary measures that the Treasury can use to extend that, we're probably not looking at hitting the debt limit until sometime in the May-June timeframe. So there'll be some time next year to talk about that. But we think that in exchange for raising the debt limit, we ought to do something about the debt.
Good morning, Senator. Jeremy Peters here.
Hi, Jeremy.
I want to follow up on that question a little bit. You know, Republicans have hit a bit of a stride now in seizing on the problems with Obamacare, and I wonder to what extent you think a messy political fight over the debt ceiling is going to muddy your message on Obamacare. Is there a lot of talk in the conference right now that Republicans really ought to stick to focusing on Obamacare?
Well, sure there is, and that is one thing, Jeremy, that I think, as you know from being up here a lot, unites Republicans of all stripes in the House and in the Senate, around the country. Everybody recognizes that this is something that is harmful to the country, is causing us loss of jobs, loss of coverage for a lot of Americans, sticker shock in terms of higher premiums. So we want to be able to focus on that. I think that the debt limit, in some respects, sort of ties into it because I think it reminds people and brings them back to the view that we are dramatically expanding the size of government, taking over literally 1/6 of the American economy with health care, and adding significantly to the debt. So it may be that there's a way that you can merge those discussions, but I think it's going to be really important as we head into this next year for Republicans to stay focused on Obamacare, to talk about spending and debt and the economy and growth. Ultimately, as I've argued many times over and tried to convince my colleagues, what Republicans need to be talking about is growing the economy, creating jobs. Pro-growth policies is what's going to get this country back on the right track, and that also helps address and deal with the debt.
All right, John, always great talking to you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, Joe. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you too. Isn't it great having, just as an old